Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you to our part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking and Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the LinkedIn live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone to say hi, and I'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Judith Sherman, a producer of Western classical music in the recording industry, who has been awarded 15 Grammys, 7 of them for Producer of the Year. We're also pleased to be joined by Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California.
We are such a privileged group of people. We all came to this because we had a passion for, a love of music, and I think that's what keeps us together even in the midst of a pandemic. I always tell people I have the greatest job on earth. I get to learn a lot of music intimately, and I never have to practice. So I'm honored to be honored by such a group of people.
Sometimes it's right.
Judith, welcome.
Hi.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into music.
I always tell people it's a series of fortuitous accidents. My family was not musicians, but it was a musical family, and we sang all the time. Get into the car, we sang until we got there. My father was one of 12. We had an adult chorus and a kids chorus in the family. But I was an English major, and I taught 7th grade English in West Seneca, New York. And my then marriage was breaking up, and I thought, I'm going back to school and get a master's degree in voice, which is what I did. While I was there, there was a big Moog set up, a synthesizer, and I needed an extra course one semester, and I got into electronic music. And so the music and the technology part came together quite early. I'd always been interested in physics and technical things and mechanical things. So the two sides of me I could see were going in the same direction. Well, but I had a singing career for a while, and then things started changing.
Tell us a little bit about that technology part, about the Moog, about finding that. So you had grown up singing. You were in one of either the adult or the children's choir of your family, depending on your age group, I guess. And
Right.
then you decided, okay, you saw that Moog synthesizer. Tell us about what role did technology then play? What was it? Give us kind of an illustration of that.
Well, the important thing was that the Moog taught you about acoustics. There are generators that generate a sound, a wave, and you learned sine wave and square wave and sawtooth wave, and then you manipulated them. But you began to listen in that way. So you hear a clarinet, and it has only every other overtone. That's why it sounds so mellow. You have an oboe, which is a sawtooth wave, and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting way of listening to sound. And then it occurred to me, of course, whenever you record anything, you're instantly turning it into electronic music. I mean, it's now a series of electronics, whether it was on tape back in the olden days, analog, or now digitally. And I don't know, just working with the Moog gave me a certain sense, it trained my ear in a certain way and my brain in a certain way. So it was a very good introduction. And then if you learn about that, then you might as well learn about the tape machines. Then you might as well learn about the microphones, and then, so on and so forth. But it also taught me to listen to spaces. So I walk into a room and I'm always looking for good acoustic spaces, of course. And it just gave me a feeling for acoustics in both the terms of the instruments and the rooms.
Wow. And so tell us also a little bit about, give us an insight into that era, because I understand that was in the 1970s, the end of the 1960s. This is a time when this kind of experimental music or experimental art, musique concrète, all those kind of things seem to be really coming to a head after the 1950s. In lots of new infrastructure being built, Eisenhower interstate system, new buildings. Tell us a little bit about that. So you were a classical singer, I understand, and then you went in this technology direction. How was that? What did your parents think about that? What did, was it just natural?
They were nonplussed, but this happened to be in Buffalo, which was a center of contemporary art and music. I got to Buffalo in 1964, and that was the same year that Lucas Foss came to Buffalo. There was a contemporary music program, Center for Creative and Performing Arts, the Creative Associates, and I went to all of those concerts at the Albright Knox Art Gallery. I hadn't the foggiest idea what I was hearing, but I figured if I kept going, kept listening, I'd figure it out. And, so to me, in those days, in the 60s, Bartok was something I couldn't get my head around. So imagine Webern and all of that. And, now I'm thinking, that's just a language I understand. But I just kept at it. I figured at some point, I'm going to get some idea of what this is about. So, so when I came to New York, I had some background in all this contemporary. I was on purpose singing a lot of contemporary music, which my voice teacher was not too happy about. And then I had to remind him that he was singing Stravinsky when he was my age, and it was sort of the same thing. And so I sang with the Steve Reich Ensemble. I sang a lot of, as they called it, bloop bleep music. I did a lot of, as well as singing Schumann and Schubert and, and all the. Yeah, it was a very good grounding to come through Buffalo and show up in New York, having some experience of at least listening to a lot of interesting things.
Wow, how exciting. What a time. So tell us now a little bit about the next steps you made. I believe that you started working in radio, and then soon after you went into the recording industry. You went into recording concerts, recording performances. Tell us all about that.
Well, I was working at WBAI, a Pacifica station. It was listener sponsored before there was NPR or any of this stuff. And we were in a converted church. The studios were in a converted church, the front third of which had been left as one big open room. So we had live concerts twice a week in that room. And I got to record everything from Ravi Shankar to big band in that. So I was, it was a great grounding in not only hearing a lot of music, but getting to record a lot of music. So BAI was first step in my audio education. I was then very privileged to be the audio engineer at the Marlborough Festival in Vermont for almost 20 years, Rudolph Serkins Festival. And that, just all these wonderful musicians out on stage every day rehearsing. And I could use them as a sound source and play microphone games. Try this microphone, try that microphone, try that setups. Go back out into the hall, listen to what it sounded like, go back into the studio, see if I could get it to sound like the way it sounded in the hall. It was really a great education in a great playground, playbox, sandbox, so that I could try things and see how live I could make it sound through the speakers compared to what I was hearing in the hall. And not a lot of people have that ability, have that, are given that kind of setup that you can experiment. You can't do that at a recording session. You can't use a musician's time to teach yourself how something should sound. But I had all these great musicians on stage, and and a studio. And so I was very privileged to have that. It really taught me everything.
And Judith, before moving on, tell us a little bit about that. Also, what it means to be an audio engineer and what it meant to be an audio engineer in those years. Because as you said, that's a time when the musicians, they're on stage and they're performing, and you could kind of go out there and just, it was your playground. But I imagine they were also really enthusiastic to have in those years somebody recording them. Because even today, when you say, oh, I'm recording you, and I've seen it myself as a journalist with a camera, everything changes. People become very serious. They really want to give you their best. Tell us about in those years when I believe it was much less common to have somebody who's listening carefully to everything you do.
Well, of course, these were live concerts. Okay, the rehearsals were the rehearsals, and there's always somebody rehearsing on stage. But the live concerts were recorded. Marlborough had its own radio show. And so my boss, quote unquote, sitting in front of me was Misha Schneider, who had been the cellist in the Budapest Quartet. And we would, at the end of the summer, put together a radio series. And he had been, listening and choosing what pieces would go on to the series. So how can I say, and this was all tape, incidentally. And it wasn't digital, it was analog tape. So we had playback sessions every week for the participants. It was such a learning experience for me and for them, because what I could do, since they were on stage at dress rehearsal, I could record their dress rehearsals and make them cassette tapes that they could take back to their room. And in fact, the year I started there was the first year that there were actually cassette machines. So this is a little, if you can imagine, that was 1976, that people had something portable rather than a reel-to-reel tape recorder, so that they could listen to themselves and learn from their rehearsals, and then go back and fix things.
Wow. So incredibly exciting. With this new technology, and as far as I understand, then in 1976, this allowed also with the portable, with those cassettes, that's when you could have all of these independent record labels. Anybody pretty much in their garage could record themselves, and this became really a a big,
It
big
was a few
catalyst.
years before that. It was a few years before that. I mean, this was really basic. And I mean, cassettes, you know, and the first ones were not little portable things that you could carry around with you. They were this big and heavy. There was a few years before you got to the Walkman. Um, and you could
Okay.
carry your music around in your pocket.
So I'd like to bring in Professor Lino Rivera from St. Mary's College of California. Hi, Lino.
Hello, Simeon, and hello, Judith.
Hi.
I am just, I'm very fascinated by this. And my question to you, Judith, is did you edit? Did you somehow try to make those recordings perfect? And if so, how did you do that with those cassette tapes? Because I feel like those kinds of performances are very honest. Nowadays, when we listen to the recordings, you know, how many takes did they do that? How many digital editing did they do? And we hear something that is perfect. But during those days, did you edit, or was it the honest to goodness recording that you broadcasted?
Well, first of all, everything was recorded to reel tape. The cassettes were just for the musicians to take home and listen to while they were still putting the piece together, so that they could judge their performances and say, hey, we got to go back and fix that crescendo. We don't get to the top of it together, that kind of thing. For the radio shows, there might be some edits, mainly if there's some noise to be covered from the audience. We would maybe take something from a dress rehearsal. But we weren't in the habit of fixing. First of all, there were so many performances, so you choose the best ones. And then if there's something technical that had to be fixed, like some, you know, really horrible coughing fit in the audience, then yeah, you try to cover that. But what went on the radio was pretty much what happened. And of course, it was Marlboro. There, you know, the performances were pretty amazing.
Okay.
I mean, you know, these were the top professionals with some of the top students.
So we will get in a little bit more into Lino's question right now. And I'd like to ask you, so Judith, can you take us on a little master class of what it means to be a music recording producer? So we were discussing before that there are 3 stages: the pre-production, the production stage, and the post-production. Can you take us on a little tour of how it is that we go from the very beginning of having just a musician come to you to the very end, where we have now a mastered recording of that musician that has now been published and distributed?
All right, so yeah, it goes from some phone call, as you imagine. The first, you know, the first thing to consider always is the venue. And the venue, does it have a piano and does it have a good piano? Okay, those are the 2 things you start out with. And when and where and how. I'm trying to figure out how to put this in the correct order. Okay, so I get this phone call and we want to record this thing in this time frame. We look for a venue. The venue is as much a part of the recording, as you might imagine, as the musicians and their instruments. So it is part of the instrument. And musicians, I know, do not play well in a dead hall. They overplay. They push because they want an answer. So we figure out when and where. And at this point, I have to start learning the music. I have to learn the music as well as the musicians do. And as I said, you know, I have this, I get to learn all this music intimately, and I don't have to practice. So so then what will happen, I will either go to a performance if the performance happens to be in New York, or I will ask for a live performance, or even just a tape of a rehearsal. So I get a sense of what the musicians are thinking about the music. And then I may have comments for them at that point. Think about this, that place that, this might have been a mistake, but if it's not, think about fixing how you get to that climax. We'll discuss the performance a little bit. And we really, the venue has so much to do with it that when we get some of the same music into the venue, some of those things go away, or sometimes they're magnified. So usually, okay, so you get to the venue, you move people around, you set up microphones, you move people around. While they're warming up, I'm doing sound check, maybe, pushing and pulling with microphones. I try to use as few microphones as I possibly can, because the more you get, every sound wave hits them all differently, and then you end up with mud. So then, and then it's also, like, Mother, may I? Can you move 3 inches that way? And just getting what I'm trying to do is get the sound coming through the speakers to sound the way things look on stage, if that makes any sense. In other words, a curve to the group, so not everybody's lined up equal presence. Then they come in and they listen and they pick at it, then we go out and move things around. But the idea is to get something that sounds alive. And so therefore you want some sense of room and some sense of space.
And Judith,
And that's something they can play in, if you know what I mean. If it's all dead and scrunched, it doesn't give you the ability to have a huge dynamic range and to use the room the way a musician uses a room. They don't know they do this, but they do it.
And Judith,
Yeah.
can you tell us, so to go back to your point, the room can't be very dry. It has to have it has to react to what the musicians do, so that they don't have to be pushing, as you said. They can hold back, and then they feel a response, so that they're also hearing themselves well. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly it. And then the thing is, in a good room, they can both use the very tiny quiet end of the audio spectrum. I say that, the microphone is 6 feet away. You can whisper if you want to whisper here. If you want to do those 3 Ps, you can't do that really in a concert, but on a recording, you really can. You can use the quiet end of things. And it also allows for a huge dynamic range, which is, excuse me, where we come up against these, which don't do not allow for a huge dynamic range. But any case, a larger dynamic range amplifies the clout, the emotional clout of the music. And so getting the sound right at the beginning, where they feel comfortable playing in the sound and they feel that what they are giving is coming through the speakers, the sound check is really important. And then once they know that's all working, then they're free to play.
Okay, and Judith, so can we have a special treat? So you've been working with the pianist, I understand, on Brahms Intermezzi, and we have 2 recordings here. And this one that we're going to listen to, I believe, was made in his kitchen or something.
Well, okay, this is, as I said, I like to hear something from what the musicians are going to record. This is Lear Williams. He's a Welsh pianist. And he sends me recorded on his iPad performances so we can talk about what he's thinking. And yeah, it's in his living room, but I have to say the living room is open into the rest of the house, so it's not incredibly dry, but it's not, yeah. So, you know, he sends me things and then we discuss things, just so I have some idea what he's up to before we actually get to recording. So yeah, so this is Brahms Opus 118 number 1, done in his living room in Pentrybechan, Wales. So
And Judy, when we're listening to this, what should we listen for? So tell us, what are you listening for? What do you want us to listen for when we listen to this?
okay, so I'm listening for his pacing, his dynamics. Does the piece work, you know? And as a matter of fact, I found his performance, I didn't have to pick at it much other than saying, don't grunt at that place, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, here it comes.
Okay. So so this is what he recorded anyways. And then so Judy, so now you've heard it and you think, okay, I can imagine that working on a recording. I imagine what that's gonna, we can go forward
Yeah.
with this. You've got the right stuff. So tell us
Right.
now, how do you said you find the right hall with the right piano that he feels comfortable playing in, that you think, okay, he can make something of this. And then what are the next steps getting, you said you've got the microphone set up, you're already in the production process at that time?
Well, yeah. Okay, so one of two things can happen. First of all, with Fleer, since he's in the UK, I don't lug my equipment over there. And the his label, Signum Classics, has a fabulous engineer who sets up everything and is now doing things in all these fancy, so you can surround, not, what's it called now, the Dolby thing where you have speakers in the ceiling and the whatever. So he's got 1 billion microphones there. We're using 2 for the stereo. But generally, I also, when I'm recording in New York, I'm also the engineer. So I have to lug the equipment there and set up and build a studio and all of that stuff. I'm losing my way here. But generally, what was the question again?
No, sure. Yeah, no. So now we've
Okay.
got we've heard this recording and you say, okay, it's okay. And now you've set up the microphones or whatever. Now tell us, what are the next steps? So this is where you go back and you say, okay, we're going to do the first take. Is that right?
Okay, so yeah, well, first take is always, the take that the artist listens to. They can request to listen to other ones, but the first one, unless they know they really don't want to hear that one, can I do another one before I listen, which sometimes happens. Then they come in and they pick. They say, oh, I shouldn't pause before that bar line, or my that's out of tune, or and if it's a group, then they have time to argue about things. First take is really sort of a learning take, because you're learning from, you're outside the take now. You're not there playing it. You're I'm trying to make them learn to listen as though this were a stranger that they were hearing. And then pick at it. Okay, we really shouldn't do that. That crescendo peaked too soon, that kind of stuff. To discuss the musical shape. And then usually take 2 is a step above, and take 3 might be even better. After that, I find if you try to keep doing complete takes, things start going downhill pretty quickly. I mean, it gets doesn't get old, but they're starting to imitate themselves. Oh, we did this wonderful thing the previous take. Let's do it again. But then they don't quite. They're imitating it. They're not doing it. So so basically, what'll happen is 3 complete. As with this, okay, this piece is less than 2 minutes. So we did 3 complete takes, and that was it. If it's a big piece, let's say, like a 12-minute Brahms movement, we might break it into, okay, do the exposition with its repeat, and then, okay, then the development, and then, on out, break it into 3 big chunks and do maybe 3 takes of each of those. And that's that not with a pianist so much, but with a group. It focuses them a little better. And then, if depending on time and energy, look, they know they have everything now. Okay, and then we might go back in and fix. You never really made that entrance after the rest. You never really were together. Let's just cover that. We'll do a few of those things. And then, depending, when they know they have it, and it's all covered, I'll ask them, would you like to perform it one more time? Knowing that everything is covered, just let the feathers fly. And I call that take A, so it feels like it's a new beginning. And very often take A is really marvelous, because they've, number one, I mean, they've had sort of a guided rehearsal through the piece. They knew where all their weaknesses were, and then very often take A is the majority of what goes on the record.
So, Judy, tell us about this. When I first contacted you, there was a moment when I said, you know, you're an audio engineer, and you said, well, not completely, kind of, but you said, not always. You said, I'm a producer. So tell us, this seems what you're doing right now, especially when you've got a group of musicians. You are really a conductor. You're really a coach. You're there. And as you said, you're setting up everything. You're setting them up for success. And the audio engineer maybe puts together, lugs the equipment, but you're kind of the brains behind this situation. You're the visionary. And that's when you know you can be a visionary, because you've had that tape from the guy's kitchen or whatever, where you can say, okay, I know I know what this could be. This could be really good. So now tell us about this, this edit process. And when you said you've got 3 takes, and most of us, I imagine, if you're going to do something that's 9 minutes or whatever, as you said, the first take, you know, that feels new. And then they listen to themselves. And then by the 3rd take, that's as much as they can handle. And then you do this take A. How does it work now with a pianist? Like, because that seems like a lot of stress for one pianist to already, you know, it seems pretty intense. How are you going to do it now with this, or how did you do it now with this pianist?
Well, first of all, as you hear, we're not editing for mistakes. We're editing for emotional clout. And in fact, with Lear, with more than with most musicians, I end up using a lot of take 1. And again, you can do that with a pianist because there's just that one musician. With a chamber group, there might be ensemble problems. There might be, especially if it's strings, it might be intonation problems. Piano, on the piano, the intonation is not up to the pianist. And then, you know, choosing takes, I do it emotionally. I mean, basically, did that touch me? Did that move me? You know, just that's really what it's about, isn't it?
And
So,
and Judy, tell us now about this. We're going to listen to the edited take 1 in a second, but tell us about, going back to Lino's question about the, you know, when there's something that you said, okay, you told me yesterday, okay, then we need to do a snippet. You know, there's some kind of problem. You've got a good emotional clout. There's something, as you mentioned yesterday, that you have an assistant taking care of bench creaks or coughing or something. So tell us, what is that? What is the fine line? Because as Lino said, I mean, pretty much every musician thinks about the recording as something where you can make, or the finished product has to be pretty much stellar. I mean, there can't be, you can't have these kind of blemishes, so to say. Tell us about that and how you strike a balance between the emotional clout you're going for and then this kind of perfection of a recording that someone can listen to without having this live experience or wanting a live experience.
well, first of all, there's no audience at the recording sessions, so we don't, you know, we don't have that. What there might be are, yeah, bench creaks for sure. Sometimes we have to reduce some breath noises especially if they're juicy. I mean, yeah, there are little noises that can get in the way, and they're so easy now to remove in digital that you know, one sweep through that just gets rid of a lot of crap. But the audience doesn't need to listen to that squeaky piano bench. But basically, There was something early in your question that I should have jumped on. I mean, okay, when you have the edit, we send it to obviously send it to the musicians and let them pick at it. Do I have a better this? Or did we ever really make a better crescendo there? Or, let them take a listen to pretty it up a little bit. Usually the second edit is little prettying up things that bother them that may not bother me. And I'm still trying to hold on to the arc of the piece. But the editing process it's an emotional one. I want things to jump out of the audio where out of the speaker, out of these little things, even if necessary. So and that has to be preserved. Even I'll tell a tale out of school. There's a string quartet I was working with, the first violinist of which could just take your breath away. She was so imaginative. And we were doing a Beethoven set with this group. And she did this absolutely amazing, wonderful thing. And the others were just, I think it was just pizzicati accompaniment. And so I get this comment back, oh, those pizzicati aren't together. And I said, but listen to what she's doing. Who cares whether those pizzicati are together? It's like, no, they had their way. We had to change. This incredible performance had to be changed for some technical idiocy. And most musicians won't go that way. Like, I don't care if I slobbered over that note, I got to that climax and yeah, so I decided I didn't want to work with that group anymore. And I was trying to figure out, because I'd been working with them for 20 years by this time, and I was trying to figure out how to tell them that, and they broke up. And I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to, but I still get to work with that violinist, who is so imaginative. So that was good.
Wow. So before we move on to the next part, I just wanted to ask again then. So in other words, and Lino and I I'm sure we'll bring this up later, but yeah, we always, as musicians, get the opposite impression from this recording situation, that it's not, that it's so much more about the perfection and all that than the emotional quality. Before we move on to that, I wanted to ask you, say you're going to work with a musician, say Keith Jarrett, and I mean, in those, Keith Jarrett recordings, even I've heard one from 2000 where it's, supremely, it's a studio album in every sense. You don't, whereas his live performances, he's always making these, very, the breaths you're talking about, and in this recording still you get this, where he goes, oh, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not edited out. It seems it's pretty much edited out, but it's not completely. What do you do in that situation?
What do you mean? What do I do? I mean,
where it seems like this is part of his performance. It is part of his performance. This makes up. So why would you want to? Would you highlight that, or do you want to get rid of that, or what?
That's a very specific thing. I mean, yes, okay, there are classical musicians who groan, and I will ask them, please, to do not do that. I mean, with Keith, it was that was part of his thing, So, but it's not part of something if you're recording Beethoven. Yeah, and well, there are some people you just can't get around it. That's At the end of his life, Claude Frank sang along, and he was giving fabulous performances and singing along, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's part of Claude. And the performances are so moving. It's even a too little a term, that, okay, he's singing along, and but he's giving you these performances, so that's what it is. Others, yeah, I work with a grunter who every big chord has to have a in front of it, and I can talk to him and he can remember for maybe the next two takes, not to sound like he's doing a karate chop. And yeah, so, you know, you can ask, and if they can't do it, they can't do it, as long as the performance is moving, as long as there's some emotional or intellectual interest going on, then you put up with it, you know.
Fantastic. Okay. So let's listen now to the second take. Here it is. Okay, fantastic. So Judy, now tell us
My
about,
God, that sounds awful on these things. Oh my God. I can't.
Judy, so tell us now, despite the our earphones and all that, tell us now you've got the right product. This has the emotional clout you're talking about. Now tell us about this mastering process. So you say goodbye, you come back to the US and to your New York studio. Tell us about this, making the whole record then, and the sequencing. What happens next?
Well, okay, so editing, you know, obviously with a solo pianist, there's not all that much compared to, say, with a string quartet, which can be, well, strings go out of tune, ensemble gets messy, balance, you know, somebody, you know, they'll decide on how they're going to balance this chord, and then, you know, 3 out of the 4 times they will, and the 4th time they won't. So there's a lot more editing that goes on once you have let's put it this way. With 2 musicians, you'll have probably 1/3 again more editing with 4 and so on, so until you get to a big group, in which case it collapses back to very little editing with an orchestra, say, or even some larger ensemble. So what happens is I listen to everything, I make my choices, I edit it, send it to them, and then they pick at it. And do we have one where we did this? Or, so then I'll go back and I'll go through, or I really wish I'd broken that chord. Did I ever do that? That kind of thing. So I'll go back in and I'll listen. And if those things happen, I'll put them in, send it to them. And then they'll either be, yeah, that's good, or I go back to that first version of, at that place. Okay, yes, this, you gave us what we wanted, but the other version had a better buildup. Just let's go back to that, or that kind of thing. And then if it's something like, well, I'm just in the midst of a series of all the Beethoven quartets with the Calidore string quartet. And with Beethoven, of course, there's not much you can do in the way of sequencing. For instance, Opus 132 and 135 have to go on the same record. That's the only way they fit, because 132 is so long, it fits with no other late Beethoven, and so on and so forth. But when you're doing something that's multiple pieces, maybe even from different composers, then there's this whole sequencing thing. Like, how do you build a structure that takes the listener from here to here to here to here to here and make it all work? Either so that the 2 things that go next to each other talk to each other in some nice way. I found one thing recently where one piece ended with these certain chords, and one of the other pieces that this pianist did opened with those same chords. A different composer so that of those same chords backwards. So those 2 just went together. Oh, that was a great, so you're looking either for that kind of thing where 2 things go together well, or that they contrast. Maybe a little bit of a shock, or so well, for instance, you're going to hear some things where sequencing, this is sequencing a record with a Paragon Ragtime Orchestra. And these are old things back from the turn of the 19th to 20th century, by different composers. It's a band of 13 people. String quartet, double bass, piano, 2 flutes, 3 cornets, a drum kit, and which is basically what the theater band was back when, when movie theaters had a theater band. This is sort of, trombone, can't forget the trombone, trombones. So sequencing these records is a lot of fun, because some things go, well, you either want something that flows one to the next thing, or something that is an entirely different thing, a real contrast. Because if you keep hearing the same thing again and again, your ear gets tired. But if all of a sudden there's something that's completely different, then the ear perks up again. So yeah, so play this is Paragon Ragtime Orchestra. And well, yeah, just and make sure you play through the spacing to the next piece. Don't turn it off. No, wait. You have to play through through the pause.
Sorry.
That's the point. So can you get sort of to the end of it and then play into the next? No, wait. Don't
Sorry.
switch tracks.
Sorry.
Okay, so there we were looking for, something's been like this. Okay, let's just do a slow drag, just for the contrast of it. So then the next one. Okay, so there we just felt at that point in the album, keep the energy up. So there was one kind of raucous thing, Deuce is Wild. And then this is right at the beginning of the album. So we figured, let's keep the energy up at this point. Whereas this next one, so at that point in the album, yeah, we figured, okay, it's time to relax a little and, Lady of the Lake, yeah, it's fun. It's really fun sequencing these rag records because there's such a range of things. If you're doing, Brahms intermezzi, they're going to be in this order, but sequencing a record is when you've got multiple things is a lot of fun, and what you wanted and what you're trying to do is make the ear have to work. In other words, go from clank to so you know, so you're either looking for something that works as a continuation or something that just really changes the whole scene.
And Judy, with that, do you ever argue with the musicians? Because I always imagine the musicians already had a very clear idea of what they wanted to happen one after another. But you're saying that is really the producer's role, is to say, you know, in the end, no, these belong together. I want that. I want that. Is that right?
Well, I know I sit with the conductor, and he and I make these decisions together. And you know, he'll be here with me, and I'll have everything up on the screen, and we can just push things around. Let's see what happens if you go from Deuces Wild to this to that. You know, like, and yeah, no, we'll just play around until we think we have it right.
Fantastic. And then, so you've got the record. It's in order. It's sequenced. And is that the end of the process, or what happens next?
For me, it's the end of the process. You know, we make umpteen different versions of it. There's, you know, the audio for Apple version, and there's, you know, or we send a master and the label does it. It's different for every project. So, but yeah, once the record is sequenced and mastered, that is getting levels all to work, and the spacings between things to work, removing all the noises that are really disturbing. Then, you know, then it's up to the label. And we don't have anything to do with the artwork or any of that. You know, we deliver a master, and then yeah, and then we're surprised when we get the package. Oh my God, is that what they did with it? You know, what, you know, we have nothing to say about what the artwork is or any of that.
Wow. Okay. So last question. So tell us, you've been at the center of the classical music recording industry for over 50 years now. Your work is held up as a model of excellence. You've won 15 Grammys for your work, 7 of them as producer of the year. I imagine for all of the reasons that you've been telling us, listening for that emotional clout, getting that emotional clout to listeners, making an incredible product. So tell us now, what's happening next? We've seen you've lived through the maturity and the collapse of the disc-shaped recording industry. Now we have smartphones that have our music and all that, and no longer LPs with needles or boom boxes. Tell us, what's next?
Oh, well, LPs are back. I hate to tell you this, with their scratches and their pops and their orange peel and everything else. They are back, and don't get me started. I see no advantage to it, but except for DJs who want to scratch the record when they're, you know, doing those things. I mean, digital isn't perfect. There are versions of digital. Well, you know, I'll get something that I think sounds really, really good, and my records, frankly, do sound good. But I send it off to Bob Ludwig, this mastering engineer in Portland, Maine, and without his changing anything, like he sprinkles pixie dust on it or something. I don't know. It just, it's yes, it's the sound I got and the sound, but there's just something else about it that, and I don't know what he does. You know, he's got magic gadgets. But yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, digital at first, it was, you know, it opened the dynamic range, which in classical music is part of the music. And unlike in pop music where things, you put up something from pop music and it looks like sausages, it goes up, it goes across, it's all like this, and it comes back down. And, part of the music, classical music, is the dynamic range. So it was great. Digital was wonderful for that. And to be able to, do that on a CD, you can't do it on an LP, incidentally. So that's why, I don't know that these cannot produce bass, these things, look at the size of them. So what you do is you hear the overtones of the bass, your brain supplies the fundamental. But I don't know where we're going. What movie was it? Was it where they spin a disc and it made, it talked, some science fiction movie. Cassettes are coming back, for pity's sake. So there is this feeling that digital has gone as far as it can go, and of course the problem with digital for the recording industry and for the musicians especially is that the music can be ripped off, that the digits can be replicated without any degradation. And so, back before digital, the most popular musicians made a lot of money from the recordings. Rubinstein, now how long ago again was Rubinstein recording? He made $250,000 a year off his the sales of his recordings. So now the musicians make nothing because it's all stolen, because digital can be replicated. And so that's why you find groups that used to, pop groups are touring more than they used to because they don't make any money from the recordings, even the pop groups. So I don't know where we're going. Something's going to have to happen. And for the musicians, if for no one else. But audio wise, I don't know where we're going. If people want LPs again and want cassettes again, it means that their ears have degraded, that they've gotten so used to listening to through these little things and off of little portable things, that when people are recording at 2496, that is 24-bit word, 96K per 96 samples per second per side, what good is that if somebody is going to be listening on these things, and now that they're doing this recording so that you can do that an Atmos thing, with surround speakers and speakers in the ceiling and all of that, who's going to be able to play that? Very few people are going to have that in their homes. It was developed, obviously, Dolby developed it for the theaters. And of course, in a movie theater, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. But it doesn't, nobody's going to have that in their homes. In fact, most recording studios don't have it. Even Skywalker Ranch, Skywalker, who could afford anything. It wasn't until I think it was I don't know if the Army band or the Air Force band, one of them recorded there, and they wanted Atmos. So Skywalker had to put out speakers in the ceiling and around everything. They do a lot of high-end recording, and they never had to do that until somebody wanted this wanted an Atmos recording. So it's going in two directions. It's going very, very high end. Now even something I did was recorded at 192 samples per second per channel. It's going very high end and it's going very low reproduction. And I don't know. I don't know where this all will shake out.
So you've got a positive feeling though? You think it's going in the right direction, or?
Well, I don't know about the sound. I think the music is healthy. I don't know what the audio world is doing. But something's got to give. I mean, musicians have to be able to make money off of their recordings again. And I don't know how that's going to happen.
Okay, so a somber last note, but what I hope very much is that we'll be able to check in with you again, Judy, and then as things go along, then you'll continue to be our guide. Thank you so much, Judith Sherman.
You're very welcome.
So let's take a look at what's coming up next week. This is, I can find it over here. We have Delora Sajic, Institute for Young Dramatic Voices. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. World-renowned mezzo-soprano Dolores Sajic knows firsthand that a few young singers find themselves in all three situations at once. These singers are born with large, sonorous voices that most singers only grow into at the very top of their careers. The unusual singers have the extraordinary opportunity to further develop their exceptional voices by exploring uncharted vocal territory, and their window of opportunity is already closing. It's now or never. The problem is that since they're so out of the ordinary, other singers look at them the way Olivia looks at Malvolio when he declares that triple wisdom, and rarely do they find the support and guidance their situation requires. 10 years before Dolores Sajic retired, having earned the status of greatest mezzo-soprano of the 20th century, she created the Institute for Young Dramatic Voices for that very reason, to give her younger peers a place to belong and the chance to do what other singers don't think is possible. It's a community where young, quote-unquote, dramatic voices meet and receive instruction by tutors who have already climbed that lonely, steep path. Come welcome Delora to our show and hear for yourself the sound of vocal greatness ×3. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Once again, that's the Dolores Sajic Institute for Young Dramatic Voices. Again, thank you so very much for this fantastic show and guidance into the music production, classical music production recording industry by Judith Sherman. Thanks very much to Professor Lino Rivera. Thanks to Agnieszka and Benoit Rivole for their support of the show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, New York City, New York, and the Bay Area, California, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.